Obscura Vault, the haunting of Eastern State Penitentiary. Imagine being alone, completely, utterly alone. No sunlight, no human voices, no contact with another living soul for days, weeks, sometimes years. Now imagine that the walls around you have absorbed every scream, every prayer, every breaking mind that ever existed within them. Imagine those walls still remember. That is Eastern State Penitentiary. And once you hear what has happened inside those crumbling corridors, you may never think about the concept of isolation the same way again. Philadelphia, 1829. A grand and terrible experiment begins. Eastern State Penitentiary opens its iron doors for the first time, and what lies inside is unlike anything the world has ever seen. This is not merely a prison. This is a philosophy made of stone and mortar. The Quaker-influenced architects who designed this place believed with genuine conviction that absolute solitude would force criminals to reflect on their sins, to commune with God, to emerge transformed. They called it the Pennsylvania System. What it produced, however, was something far darker than redemption. Each prisoner received their own individual cell, their own private exercise yard. When transported through the prison, they wore hoods over their heads so they could not make eye contact with other inmates. Guards wore socks over their shoes to muffle their footsteps. The silence was total, intentional, weaponized, and within months of opening, prisoners began to break. Not metaphorically, mentally, completely, and catastrophically. Reports of self-mutilation, psychosis, and uncontrollable screaming echoed through those hooded halls. Charles Dickens visited in 1842 and left horrified, writing that the isolation inflicted torture far more cruel than any physical punishment he had ever witnessed. And still, the experiment continued for over a century. By the time Eastern State closed in 1971, it had housed more than 75,000 inmates, among the most famous, Al Capone himself, who spent 8 months here in 1929. But it is not the famous residents who left the deepest marks on this place. It is the forgotten ones, the ones who sat in darkness long enough to lose the boundary between themselves and the shadows. Then the building was abandoned, and that is when the stories truly begin. For decades, the penitentiary sat empty, rotting from the inside out, vines crawling through cracked ceilings, cell blocks collapsing under the weight of time. Workers hired for restoration efforts in the 1990s began reporting things they could not explain. One locksmith, a man tasked with restoring the old cell locks, was working alone in cell block 4 when he described an overwhelming force, a rush of energy that seemed to pull the faces of tortured souls directly from the walls themselves. He stood frozen, watching shadowy figures stretch and contort before him, figures that seemed as shocked to see him as he was to see them. He left the building that day and refused to return. He was not the only one. Visitors, historians, and paranormal investigators have documented shadow figures in the guard towers, figures that duck behind the parapet as if still carrying out their duties long after death. In cell block 6, a dark, cackling apparition reportedly slides along the walls, moving with impossible speed. Tour guides have reported cold hands grabbing their shoulders in empty corridors. Security cameras have captured mists, shadows, and shapes that move with deliberate, purposeful motion through locked sections of the prison in the dead of night. And then there is cell block 12. In every major paranormal investigation conducted at Eastern State, cell block 12 emerges as something uniquely disturbing. Ghost hunting teams have recorded audio here, strange audio, voices that whisper words in a language that sounds almost like English, but slightly, terrifyingly wrong. Electromagnetic readings spike without explanation. On one overnight investigation, a researcher reported waking from a dreamless sleep to find herself standing in the center of the cell block with no memory of how she got there. Her hands pressed flat against a cold stone wall, and the absolute certainty that something on the other side had been pressing back. Here is where the story takes a turn that even the most skeptical minds have struggled to dismiss. In 2018, a team of researchers cross-referenced historical prison records with the specific locations where paranormal activity is most frequently reported. The overlap was extraordinary. The cells with the highest concentration of reported phenomena corresponded almost perfectly with cells that had been used for extreme punishment. Cells where inmates had been strapped into the mad chair, a device that restricted all movement for days at a time. Cells where the water bath punishment was administered, prisoners submerged in freezing water, then hung on walls to freeze through the night. The architecture of suffering and the architecture of haunting appear to be the same map. What does that tell us? Is it possible that trauma itself can leave a physical imprint on a place? That years of concentrated human suffering can saturate the very molecules of stone and iron until some residue of consciousness, some echo of anguish, becomes permanently embedded in the structure. Scientists would call that impossible. But the witnesses keep coming, and the experiences keep accumulating, and Cell Block 12 keeps whispering. Eastern State Penitentiary still stands today, a crumbling cathedral of punishment and isolation in the middle of Philadelphia, open for tours, open for investigation, open to anyone brave enough to walk those corridors after dark. Every year, thousands of people step inside. Many leave unchanged. Some leave shaken to their core. And a quiet few leave absolutely convinced that the men who suffered and died within those walls never fully left. So here is the question I want to leave with you tonight. If a place absorbs the pain of those who suffered within it, if the echoes of isolation and madness can survive the deaths of the bodies that produce them, what does that say about the experiment itself? Did Eastern State Penitentiary transform its prisoners, or did it simply trap them there forever? What do you think happened inside those walls? If this story unsettled you even slightly, you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Subscribe to Obscura Vault, because we have only just begun to go deeper into the dark.